Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Vegas. My name is Dottie Tosan. I'm a senior account manager with Amazon Web Services. Specifically, I work with the startup division. So my sweet spot is early stage startups building on AWS. I'm also excited about today's presentation because we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart: increasing supply diversity. I have with me here today two wonderful founders who I'd like to call my family members, Rayford and Basil. They are with Scaleup. They'll be talking with us here about what Scaleup is doing to solve this challenge. Without further ado, I want to call on my brother, Rayford, and Basil to come on stage, introduce themselves, and go through their presentation.
Appreciate it, Dottie. Good afternoon, everybody. See if I get my slides right here. I'm not Dottie. I'm Rayford Davis. I'm the CEO of Scaleup. I have the pleasure of speaking with you today about how do we leverage technology to really drive commercial equity through supplier diversity. Just by way of background, before I started Scaleup, I was actually working at Amazon. I worked in AWS leading the digital innovation team across the southeast region of the US. Now before that, I led digital business efforts in startups, in large corporations, and even in higher education. In addition to that work, I've worked in education and economic equity. And I am one who believes that entrepreneurship with a social impact truly has the opportunity to change the world. I look forward to talking with you more about that. But before I do, I want to introduce you to our head of technology, Basil Udaudu.
Hey, everybody. My name is Basil Udaudu, and I'm head of technology at Scaleup. I've spent over 15 years in the technology industry working with companies large and small to build software solutions to solve their most critical business needs. It is a pleasure for me to work with Rayford at Scaleup because it allows me to combine two of my biggest passions: software architecture and working with diverse small businesses. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Rayford so he can tell you a little bit more about what the mission is.
Thank you, Basil. So the conversation for today, we're not going to start with supplier diversity. We're actually going to start with the problem. And the problem that supplier diversity really tries to solve is a gap. It's a gap around the wealth gap. But then we'll talk about how we can leverage commerce and entrepreneurship to actually close that gap. As we do that, we'll talk about how we'll then leverage technology to scale the solution such that that gap can be widespread and have a worldwide impact. Finally, we'll close by letting you know how you can get involved, and also highlighting how Amazon is leading in supplier diversity as well. That said, let's start with the gap. Don't know if you know this, but in the US, there is a wide and persistent racial wealth gap. Depending on which statistics you look at, anywhere from 8 times to 10 times difference between the average black family and the average white family in this country. Now, there are lots of reasons in history of why that gap exists and why it's persistent. We'll leave that for another conversation, but the fact is that exists. And not only does it exist, but it impacts the quality of life of those who are on the lower end of that spectrum. When we talk about quality of life, we mean access to good health care. We mean education opportunities, employment opportunities, and also housing, all the key factors of the quality of life of these populations. Now, the interesting thing, while we want to talk about closing the wealth gap, in closing the wealth gap, it doesn't just benefit those that are at the lower end of that gap. Closing the wealth gap benefits everyone. Here's some research from McKinsey & Company that showed that if we were to be able to close the wealth gap over a 10-year period, that would be worth $1 to $1.5 trillion of increased commerce and investment to the US GDP. That doesn't just benefit those who are at the bottom of that gap. That benefits everyone. Now, One of the ways to close this gap is through entrepreneurship and scaling entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, as a couple of data points, it has been shown that particularly for black populations, that the median net worth of black business owners is 12 times higher than that for black non-business owners. Through business ownership and scaling that, we would be closing the wealth gap. In addition to that, 2/3 of black-owned businesses hire predominantly black employees. So it would be closing the wealth gap by increasing employment and reducing unemployment. Now, for those who may think that, is that preferential? Are those employers preferring black employees to not? That's not the case. They're just hiring in their networks, quite frankly, as we all do. In a previous life, I was a consultant, and you had to be a part of the recruiting team, not just to be one of the consultants. And so which recruiting team did I sign up for? My alma mater, right? We all recruit in our networks. And so in doing so, that is where scaling these diverse-owned businesses would actually increase the employment for these populations as well. However, I just talked about scaling, and scaling has been a challenge for diverse-owned businesses. I have on the screen a few of the reasons why. Number one is something that I mentioned before, the personal wealth gap. So one of the main opportunities, one of the main resources that's used to scale a business is the founder's own personal wealth, because that personal wealth also provides access to additional wealth. Additionally, it is documented there's been systemic bias in growth capital investments, particularly as it comes to bank lending. Third, there's an underrepresentation of commercial decision makers in the networks that many of these business founders exist. And then last is just the law of numbers. Businesses have a typical failure rate, but given the small population of diverse-owned businesses, when you apply that failure rate, you get a lot smaller number of businesses that actually get to scale. Now, these factors have played out over our society. And when I was working in Amazon 3 years ago, the CEO of Amazon lifted that. As you all know, about 3 years ago, there was a lot of social unrest in this country, and every CEO was speaking to it. And I was very inspired to hear Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS, speak to it at reInvent just 3 years ago.
The reality is, for the last several hundred years, the way we treated black people in this country is disgraceful and something that has to change. We're working on it at Amazon. I know a lot of companies are, but I think the important thing for us all to realize is that this does not get solved in a few months. It can't be something that we work on for a few months and then turn our attention elsewhere. It's going to take several years of us working together, but we need to do it.
For those of you that were recording that, it's actually on YouTube. I can share the link with you, at the end of this talk. But I was very inspired, to hear that. And at that same time, I was wondering to myself, Rayford, what could you be doing, right? What type of social entrepreneurship could you engage in at this stage in your career to make an impact and a difference? And for me, it was about leveraging the resources available, to me to help scale entrepreneurship. There's a number of efforts to help start new businesses for diverse founders, and that's good and that's needed, and we need more of them. But we saw very, very little to actually help those that started the businesses scale them. So I was able to pull together a team that included Brandy Nellums and Cliff Goins onto a team at Amazon. And Amazon funded this project. The project was focused on scaling diverse-owned businesses, actually scaling black-owned businesses, to be very specific, at that time. And Amazon enthusiastically got behind this effort and supported this work. As we got into this work, we did what any entrepreneur does, right? You do a little bit of thinking, but then you get to the, kind of the brass tacks. And so we identified 9 Black-owned businesses that had revenues anywhere from $2 to $25 million annual revenue to figure out how we could scale these businesses. What could we do in working with them to help them scale? Well, we were looking to help them get big chunks of revenue. And those are going to come from big enterprise customers. As we looked at their potential enterprise customers, there was a function that was actually already identified to help their customers identify them. That role is called supplier diversity. So I want to pause for a second and just talk about the history of supplier diversity and why these functions exist. So the supplier diversity movement actually started back in the 50s and 60s as a part of the civil rights movement to bring equity through commerce and entrepreneurship. AT&T, General Motors, and IBM were some of the first to establish their corporate supplier diversity programs. Additionally, President Nixon and President Carter also instituted executive orders and signed legislation to ensure that in the public sector that supplier diversity and opportunity for these businesses would be lifted to the forefront that hadn't been up until this point. So for those that are wondering what actual supplier diversity means, right, are those businesses that are at least 51% owned and operated by groups and individuals that have typically been underrepresented or underserved. The categories that you see on the screen here are those that most Fortune 500 corporations will identify as diverse-owned suppliers with whom their supplier diversity leaders target. Now, as I mentioned, 3 years ago when Andy Jassy made those statements at reInvent, a lot of companies were making statements about how much they wanted to increase spending to Black-owned and diverse-owned businesses. They were doing that by looking at their spending and trying to figure out what percent of their spending they wanted to go to diverse-owned businesses, a very top-down analysis. Well, when we analyzed kind of those commitments, and we expand that across the Fortune 1000 and large government procurement organizations, we see that what they spent last year versus what they are targeting to spend in 2025 leaves a $300 billion gap. That's a huge gap. So the supplier diversity teams will spend their time trying to identify suppliers where their corporations can spend money to actually meet those targets that they set out. Here's the challenge. Large corporations, procurement organizations, are set up to do business with other large organizations. And the challenge is when you look at diverse-owned businesses, there aren't enough diverse-owned businesses out there to actually meet that target. Here's an example. Today in this country, there are less than 100 Black-owned businesses that generate $100 million in revenue. Now, I'm excluding an athlete that has a big contract and may put that contract under an LLC or may have a licensing deal or something like that. I mean, operating companies, right, that have, kind of employees and organizations and that kind of thing. Less than 100 Black-owned businesses do $100 million in revenue. For perspective, that is 0.6% of all such businesses in this country. You will see very similar and comparable statistics for other categories of diversity as well. Now, the corporations realize this, and they're working really hard to provide programs to support these businesses and help them get to scale, right? So to help drive revenue, they'll actually make introductions across the large corporations that are big labyrinths, kind of for these diverse-owned suppliers to navigate. From a financing standpoint, they'll sometimes offer better payment terms, something a lot better than the typical 90-day or even 120-day payments to help them with their cash flow. And third, from a knowledge standpoint, they'll often assign an internal executive to be a mentor and help that business kind of navigate the enterprise, or even sponsor them to go to a third-party training program. Here's the challenge. That is helpful, but that's not sufficient, right? To actually reach scale, what those businesses need are new enterprise customers. They need multiple to really get to and beyond the $100 million mark. From a financing standpoint, it can't just be the cash flow benefit. They actually need institutional debt and or equity capital as they scale that business. And then last, they need capacity. They need people in other entities who can actually champion their efforts with their strategic networks and solutions that build capacity in those organizations. While we were doing this work inside of Amazon on this project, this is where we saw a gap, and this is where we saw an opportunity for innovation. This is where innovation and technology can close the market gap. Now, when we really think about closing the gap and making a change across the world, we need to have a really big goal. Really big goal leads to big innovation. So if we start with the less than 100 businesses that do $100 million in annual revenue, we said, what if we 10x that number? If we can 10x that number and get to over 1,000, that's a big growth that then requires innovation. Because to get to that 1,000, all of the companies that we touch won't make it. We're going to have to touch tens of thousands of companies. And while you could do that with arms and legs and people, it gets really expensive and really inefficient. And this is where technology can be really valuable. Additionally, as you start an effort, you need to be very targeted. So we said we want to target those businesses that we said are ready to scale, right? When you start a new effort, you really are looking for where you can get a high yield, where you can get a high conversion of those businesses that you touch, getting to the goal. And so we said, number one, what does ready to scale mean? The companies actually have to want to get to $100 million in revenue. Not every small business wants to get there, and that's fine. But for our purposes, we wanted those businesses that wanted to get to scale. Two, they already had at least one enterprise customer. We were looking for businesses that weren't trying to figure out how to deliver for an enterprise, but that had already figured it out, but they just needed to scale to other enterprises. So these are businesses that were somewhere between $5 and $30 million in revenue. That's not a hard and fast number, but it's not a startup business, if you will. It's a business that's already there, but that's looking to scale. And then last, it's a business that already had a leadership team in place. So now, as we're inside of Amazon, we're doing this pilot, we started thinking about, kind of who in Amazon could help us from a technology perspective. So Amazon has a team called the AWS Envision Engineering Team, led by Don Sothert. And they provided technology resources and teams to actually work with us. And we did some prototyping of how we can connect the pilot businesses with other customers, institutional capital, and those that champion their capacity building. The innovation that we ended up with was developing a mechanism by which we can aggregate the vital scaling resources that each of these businesses will need as they scale, but not just aggregate them, but aggregate them in a way where we can proactively link them together for the long scaling journey. For the business growing from $10 million in revenue to $100 million in revenue, that's not going to happen overnight. Even if we can accelerate them, that's going to be a 5 to 10 year journey on an accelerated path. Additionally, every one of these businesses isn't the same. So they were going to need a unique combination of these resources to be able to get to scale as fast as possible. So in January of this year, we actually transitioned that project out of Amazon into an independently Black-owned tech startup. We did so with Amazon support. Amazon was our first customer and still a strategic partner, but we all agreed that we believed that we could grow faster in this structure, working with Amazon as opposed to for Amazon. And so we started the business Scaleup. That said, I want to bring back my colleague, Basil, to talk to you about Scaleup.
right. As Rafer just elaborated, those 3 C's, customers, capital, and champions, are critical to accelerating the growth of these high-potential, ready-to-scale, diverse suppliers. Accessing these 3 C's has historically been a challenge for these diverse suppliers, and it requires a lot of time, money, and additionally, relationships that oftentimes these suppliers do not have. Let's talk about the suppliers that Scaleup is focused on and how those suppliers traditionally access new customers, capital, and champions. Let's use this diagram as a representation of the ecosystem that these diverse suppliers are working in. These small but very active points represent these diverse suppliers who have built amazing businesses that oftentimes reach $5 to $30 million in annual revenue. These businesses, if given unlimited time and resources, we believe most of them would probably reach that $100 million mark. Unfortunately, the time and investment necessary for them to access those 3 C's organically is oftentimes too much of a hurdle for thousands of these companies to overcome. For example, for accessing new customers, these companies really have to pound the pavement to get customers that are outside of their current network. They've got to go to trade shows. They've got to go to networking and marketing events. They have to send out mass marketing and even sometimes cold calling just to get an opportunity in front of an executive buyer with influence within their organization. Getting those types of opportunities without those being in your current network sometimes are near impossible for these companies. Accessing and navigating the capital markets can be just as difficult. Understanding the types of capital that they need to access that meets their business strategy, getting the access to the investors and the other capital providers that can provide them that capital, as well as successfully convincing those capital providers to work with those companies, is oftentimes a hurdle that is historically difficult for these diverse suppliers to overcome. And without an organic, robust network of executives within their industry that have already scaled businesses to the level that they're looking to get to, it is very difficult for these diverse suppliers to find champions that can join their board, give them the guidance that they're going to need to operate at that $100 million level that they're seeking to gain. Our solution to this is the Scaleup Market Network. Scaleup provides these diverse suppliers a network of customers, capital, and champions that can help them scale to meet their business goals. Once they have access to that network, these suppliers can do what they already do best: execute on their contracts, grow their operations, and invest in the future of their business as they scale to that $100 million level. Scaleup offers introductions to these suppliers and enterprise customers based on the purchasing needs of these enterprise customers, as well as the ability of these suppliers to win and execute on those contracts. Scaleup offers introductions to capital providers, as well as assistance in navigating those capital markets. From mezzanine financing to lines of credit, Scaleup helps these suppliers get introduced to these capital providers, as well as understand what capital types are strategically best aligned with their business goals. And Scaleup provides introductions to champions, executives that have already scaled businesses beyond $100 million in their industries. These executives can join their board, provide them ad hoc consulting services, and provide them the guidance that they're going to need to operate at that much higher level once they get there. With access to these 3 C's, like I said earlier, these suppliers can do what they already do best: grow their businesses and provide value back to those communities that they're already a part of. So now we get to talk about, personally, my favorite part. How do we build out this market network with the technology that's necessary to get it done? The design of our architectural platform is built on 3 important pillars that we're going to go ahead and talk about. So let's get into it. One of the most important pillars for our architecture is flexibility and scale. We need an architecture that can scale out to meet the demands of the thousands of businesses that we're going to be working with and the hundreds of enterprise customers, capital providers, and champions that are going to be a part of that platform network as well. Nobody is better at scale and flexibility than AWS. So partnering with AWS as our technology partner gives us access to a myriad of services that can provide that scale and flexibility need that we're looking for. First of which is AWS Amplify. We're using that for an all-in-one development framework, deployment pipeline, and infrastructure automation capability for our front-end web application. With the power of Amplify, we can spend resources on developing new features for our users instead of worrying about provisioning infrastructure, developing deployment pipelines, and the other types of activities that are necessary to get a web application out there and to get it scaled. From a flexibility standpoint, nothing's more flexible than containers. So we're choosing to use Amazon ECS for our microservices architecture. It was important that we be able to leverage any type of technology that's necessary for the different types of services that we need to provide to our users. So for example, if we want to provide a machine learning model, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we can leverage a microservice based on Python. So we can take advantage of the myriad of machine learning libraries that are available for that language. And if we want to build an API, we can make what is obviously the best choice and build that with Java. If you want to talk to me later about why I believe that's the best choice, I'll be in the back. But we've got plenty of options for how we can deploy our microservices into a containerized environment and have a myriad of technology options with Amazon ECS. DynamoDB was the best possible choice for us as far as our primary database for our platform. With the region-level scale that you get right out of the box with DynamoDB, we don't have to worry about building out read replicas to try to create that type of scale that we need to provide a snappy solution for our customers. And then creating our data schema based on the access patterns of our application also aids with that speed that we need to create the snappy experience that our customers have come to expect from enterprise software. Our next pillar, proactive introductions, as I mentioned earlier, are core to the platform capabilities provided by Scaleup. The introductions that we're going to provide suppliers to customers and vice versa, to capital providers and to champions are going to be done proactively. These suppliers are going to provide us information about their businesses and their business goals. Customers will provide us purchasing request needs, and we're going to proactively make those connections for those customers without them having to query and search. So we need a robust engine that's going to perform those activities behind the scenes. The machine learning engine that we're building that's going to run our introductions is going to be using the myriad of tools that are available via Amazon SageMaker. SageMaker is critical to the goals that we have as far as building out this introduction engine. It provides us a one-stop shop for all the machine learning tools that we need to manage our data, to train and to test our model, and to deploy our model into production once it's ready to roll. Additionally, one of the important data inputs into that introduction engine is the previous relationships that those organizations on the platform have already established. So we're going to be storing those relationships in a graph database. Leveraging Amazon Neptune as that graph database gave us the ability to deploy a serverless graph database that requires little management overhead and gives us that ability to map out those disparate relationships and then to leverage those relationships for our machine learning engine in the future as well. So having that powerful ability for that graph database without a whole lot of legwork to get that stood up was an incredible boost to our productivity and something that really only happens with the power of AWS and the cloud. The third important pillar of our platform and the way that our platform functions is intelligent document processing. A big part of the way that we make introductions between customers, capital, champions, and those suppliers is by intaking different documents from each of these organizations. For example, the way that we're going to be understanding those purchasing requests from those enterprise customers is by leveraging the documents that they're already creating when they need to source for those purchasing requests. Those RFPs, those RFQs, those RFIs, the class of RFXs that they're already creating. We're going to be leveraging those to define the purchasing request and to make those proactive introductions to suppliers that can win and meet those needs that are described in those requests. By leveraging a tool like Amazon Textract to parse via OCR those disparate document types, Amazon Comprehend to take that text that was provided by Amazon Textract and to analyze that text and pull inferences from the types of documents that are provided, and then to use generative AI tools like Amazon Bedrock to actually interpret and condense that text into a format that's easily interpretable by our introduction engine is critical to the functionality of that pipeline. We want to make sure that we're providing our users a seamless experience without them having to use too much more of outside of what they're already doing. So leveraging an intelligent document processing pipeline such as this shows the breadth of capabilities that are available on the AWS platform and is critical to the experience that we're trying to provide for our customers. Technology is critical for delivering what we're trying to do to those suppliers, that customer, that capital, and that champion connection to help them scale to meet their goals. And AWS has been a critical partner for us in meeting our technology needs. So now I'm going to hand it back to Rayford. He's going to talk a little bit more about our progress on that market network.
Thank you, Basil. So really important for us to get to scale that we have to do it through technology. We can't do it with just arms and legs and hands, right? To make the impact that we want to make in closing the wealth gap through supplier diversity. So now, where are we? So we've partnered with a number of Fortune 200 companies. Some of those logos you see here, there are some others that aren't on the screen. Those companies have actually nominated their highest potential to scale, their ready to scale suppliers. And so you see some of the categories of the suppliers that we have started to onboard onto Scaleup. We've also identified and recruited a number of capital providers. As Basil mentioned, everything from just term loans and mezzanine debt all the way to private equity, all the way up and down the capital stack, what the supplier will need as they go through the scaling journey. And we've also identified champions, those that might be individuals that serve on the board of directors, the board of advisors, or those that provide solutions like ERPs and CRMs and consulting and recruiting services, those that help the suppliers build capacity. While we did just spin out as an independent earlier in January, we are off and running and we have some successes to share. So I want to share one success story with you now. This is from Myavana. Myavana is a digital hair. Let me not steal the thunder from Candace, the CEO, and let her describe Myavana to you.
Hi, my name is Candace Mitchell-Harris, and I am the founder and CEO of Myavana. We're revolutionizing retail through personalized hair care guidance using AI technology that can scientifically analyze your hair strands and recommend the perfect products for your hair. When we joined Scaleup, we had just landed our first enterprise customer, Unilever, who licensed our AI technology for one of their hair care brands' e-commerce sites. And at that time, I needed to close more B2B customers. As we started working with Scaleup, our acceleration began immediately. We got connected with an amazing champion who is now on our advisory board that provides very strategic guidance in the enterprise retail world. We were able to land multiple pilots, including one that we were able to demo at the largest festival for Black women, the Essence Festival, which supercharged our growth as well. And also working with one of the best retailers in the country. I can't mention the name, but being connected internally with their beauty tech team and pushing forward our integrations to provide personalized guidance across every retail channel. We were able to get that started, along with closing another investment with the Amazon Alexa Fund.
Our business has grown exponentially ever since progressing on our growth plan with Scaleup, and one of the biggest outcomes was that Amazon gave us the opportunity to exhibit at CES at the beginning of this year, and we just closed one of our largest clients from that experience. And our revenue growth has increased, our valuation has increased, and I'm constantly connected with the right people in the industry, decision makers, and people who can help us move our business forward.
Myavana was ready to scale. Myavana just needed an opportunity. They needed some acceleration. They needed the right network to get them to the right next enterprise customers, to get them to the next round of capital, and to get them to a champion who actually had relationships that she didn't even know that she needed to be asking for. That is what many of these businesses need. And that is why we've created the Scaleup Market Network. So now, what happens for us next? Well, interesting, as we've been having conversations with chief procurement officers for large enterprises, we've learned something. That the mousetrap that we're building, the Scaleup Market Network, isn't just beneficial to Black-owned businesses or diverse-owned businesses, but it's actually beneficial to these large corporations in all of their work with small and medium businesses that supply them. Because while those businesses are very valuable in the supply chain by providing innovation, access to unique products and services, they actually bring with them a lot of risk. It is much more sustainable from a supply chain perspective for those SMB suppliers to be growing a lot faster as their enterprise customers grow. For us, it's very beneficial in that now Scaleup can actually solve a bigger market problem. So we are not by any means, kind of turning our attention from our bedrock and our foundation, but we see the opportunity where we can solve the targeted problem, and as we do so, we learn to be able to solve a bigger market problem as well. So for our next steps, what do we need to do? Well, as Basil mentioned, we need to continue to build out the Scaleup platform. 2, we need to recruit more of those 3 C's, the customers, capital providers, and champions. And then 3rd, we need to cultivate our own strategic partners for Scaleup that can get us into networks where we're not. Now, for those of you that are raising your hands and asking how can you be helpful, if you have relationships with chief procurement officers and heads of supplier diversity, particularly at large enterprise corporations or public sector organizations, that could be helpful. If you are or know of providers of products and services that help smaller businesses increase their capacity, let us know. That will be very helpful. And last, if you know B2B executives that have scaled businesses beyond $100 million in revenue, let us know, because we have found, have been the best advisors and members of the board of directors. If you want to know how to engage with Scaleup, there's a QR code that you can go to that link and find out more. Additionally, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Basil to find out more. There's our email information as well. That said, really appreciate you all's attention and look forward to engaging with each of you at the end of this session. But before we do that, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring Dottie back to talk about what Amazon is doing in supplier diversity.
Thank you, Rayford. Great. Thank you, Rayford. Just going to put this in my pocket here. So we started the session talking about reInvent being about solutions. And Rayford and Basil have spoken more about what Scaleup is doing to solve this problem. My job here is to tell you about what Amazon as a body is doing about this problem also. I'll start with our ethos, what we believe. We believe that advancing supplier diversity and inclusion is important because it's good for our business. It aligns with our customer expectations, and it's also the right thing to do for society as a whole. Why do we believe this? We believe this for three major reasons. The first is that this improves our procurement capabilities. Secondly, it increases innovation. And lastly, it supports economic growth. We have a three-pronged approach. The first is driving impact. The second is working closely with advocacy groups. And the third part is basically creating standardized procedures. So far, we've seen a lot of results. We've spent $3.3 billion with 375 certified diverse suppliers. Secondly, we've seen those suppliers spend $1.5 billion with Tier 2 diverse suppliers. So think about it this way. We have Tier 1 suppliers, but also our suppliers have subcontractors they work with. We have encouraged them to employ more supply contractors into their network. Thirdly, we've seen like 2,200 diverse suppliers leveraging our Supply Connect portal. And lastly, we've had 727 total certified diverse suppliers in our supply network. I started this session by saying reInvent is about solving problems. And I also told you all that I work with early-stage startup founders. Every startup exists to solve a problem. Those problems are hard problems. And I tell them this quote that I always tell myself every morning I wake up. Be caught trying. Be caught trying to solve those problems. Be caught trying to advance the world. Be caught trying to make the world a better place. Because there are a lot of people who are going to sit down and complain about problems, but you have to sit up and solve those problems. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you all with this word today, be caught trying. I'll bring back Basil and Rayford on stage to give some final words.
We don't have too much else to say, Dottie, but just thank you all for your time and for your engagement. Thank you, Dottie, for your continued partnership. And we look forward to working hard together to solve this problem of the wealth gap through commerce and supplier diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.